I'm Caroline Hyde from London, in for Emily Chang. This is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up, tech mobilizes against racism and hate as CEOs take to social media to condemn the violence in Charlottesville. The latest on what they're saying and how it impacts Silicon Valley's relationship with Washington. Plus, Bitcoin's meteoric rise. The cryptocurrency surges past $4,000 to another record high. We'll track its course into uncharted territory and the reasons behind its winning run. And Angry Birds is hatching an IPO, but will investors buy in? We'll consider options and challenges for its parent company, Rovio. First to our lead, President Donald Trump called out white supremacists for their role in the deadly violence over the weekend in the United States of Virginia. Now, this as the administration sought to counter a backlash against his initial failure to directly hold hate groups accountable.
Racism is evil, and those who cause violence in its name are criminals and thugs, including the KKK, neo-Nazis, white supremacists, and other hate groups that are repugnant to everything we hold dear as Americans.
Trump's initial remarks over the weekend faced criticism from business leaders and lawmakers on both sides of the aisle, claiming his statement was inadequate. It also prompted Merck CEO Ken Frazier to resign from the president's manufacturing council and sparked reaction from Silicon Valley's top tech leaders, including Apple CEO Tim Cook, who tweeted, "We've seen the terror of white supremacy and racist violence before. It's a moral issue, an affront to America. We must all stand against it." Meanwhile, HPE CEO Meg Whitman, who also said Americans expect their political leaders to denounce white supremacists by name. Hate must not be given refuge in America. With us now from San Francisco, Bloomberg Technology Executive Editor Tom Giles, and from the White House, Bloomberg News reporter Jennifer Epstein. Jennifer, I want to start with you because, interestingly, we've seen the business community once holding Donald Trump to account, and it's an important demographic for him, given he considers himself a business leader as well.
Right. You know, every time that there's been something that's been a bit objectionable, you've seen a little bit of pushback. One or two people who have been involved in his councils and people who he might have considered to be someone maybe not quite his peer, but of his level. So, Elon Musk dropped out of one of the CEO councils over the immigration push that Trump had a couple months ago about banning certain groups from entering the country. And now we saw Ken Frazier from Merck step down, resign, and within less than an hour from when he did that, President Trump responded with a tweet saying, well, now that you're not on my commission, maybe you have time to lower drug prices. And I think that reflects a little bit of the concern and the tension that's going on for a lot of executives, is that they know that if they speak out against Trump on any of these issues that are really controversial and that seem to have a large percent of the country, if not majority, certainly plurality turned against the president, is, if you do speak out, does the president then tweet against you? Then does your stock price go down? Does the president try to regulate against your company? What comes next? And I think that's probably what a lot of executives are dealing with when they really, are not happy with how the president responded over the weekend and even today.
Yeah, I mean, interestingly, Tom, we've seen companies responding in different manners today as well, not just directly to Donald Trump, but also directly to some right-wing particular media outlets. We've seen GoDaddy step in and remove the domain for the Daily Stormer. We've seen Google also cancelling that domain after they moved to Google. Violation of terms of service, we understand. Airbnb have been stopping some of the right-wing white supremacists from using their particular service. How difficult is it for technology companies to weigh in here?
Well, I think the tech companies have a lot of leeway. They can look at what their terms of service say, and they basically have rules against things that you say, hate speech, types of hate speech, inciting violence. And so it's not that much of a stretch for a company to say, okay, well, if you're encouraging violence, if you're encouraging hate speech against groups, Jews, people of color, the list goes on and on and on. So I think there's a lot of leeway. And remember, the tech companies, none of these companies are forced to adhere to some idea, some First Amendment principles in terms of, free speech is free for everybody, so you can get on our site, you can get on Facebook, you can get on Google, and say or do whatever the heck you want. It just doesn't work that way. And it's interesting the way the CEOs have been responding. I would say in response to Jennifer, yes, to some degree you're concerned about what he will say, but Elon Musk, interestingly, after having left the council in response to the climate accord move by Trump, there was no, he hasn't gotten any retribution really from Trump. Ditto for Uber, which left over immigration issues. You don't see Trump getting out there and talking about Uber. Trump's very selective about, remember, drug prices are a hot button issue for him. So it wasn't that surprising that he would use some kind of an opportunity to do this. It's just very, very tone deaf, and the timing could not be worse.
Yeah, Jennifer, I mean, it's interesting. We saw Bob Iger as well from Disney, and indeed Elon Musk stepping down over the climate change issues with Donald Trump. And as we heard from Tom, Uber CEO of the time, Travis Kalanick, moving back on the basis of immigration. Would we expect any more to start standing down? I mean, has Donald Trump done enough to ease the concerns of the business community? Because we only saw one resignation, to be fair.
Right. I mean, it sounds like there are a few people who are on various CEO councils, manufacturing council, who are considering their options. We saw the president of the AFL-CIO, the big labor union, today say that he's considering his options. That's Richard Trumka. Very big move for labor if they chose to pull out of this. But I think that one of the challenges that a lot of these people who are on these commissions are taking into consideration is that they want to be a voice at the table. They want to be part of these economic conversations. But at the same time, they do also want to take a stand on these moral issues, and they're sort of, balancing those two things. And that's why I think you've seen, each time there's been a controversy, that a few people finally say enough is enough, and that may continue to happen if this president continues along the same course.
And Tom, talk to us about an interesting take that you've been writing about on Twitter, because this is the difficult balancing act as well in terms of we've seen their policies potentially about to be tested, because there's there's a Twitter account at the moment identifying white supremacist actual protesters out there.
Right. There's a domain. There's a handle out there. Yes, you're racist. And what they've been doing is identifying or getting crowdsourcing people they've taken photos of people who have participated in the protests, and they've gotten the Twitter hive, if you will, to identify who those people are. And you're seeing some backlash. You're seeing this one guy from Berkeley who lost his job. I read that another family disowned one of the individuals who was identified as having been in this protest. There are concerns or questions about, are we identifying the right person? On the other hand, once you get out there and put yourself in public, you appear in a march, there are going to be photographers. It's a very public space. You're making a very public statement. You're not wearing white sheets. You're not hiding behind some costume. You do make yourself vulnerable to the public identifying you, and there are consequences for what you do and what you participate in. And I think that's what these people are recognizing. And so Twitter has become a means for identifying who these people are.
Fascinating discussion. We'll see how the tech community continues to respond. Thank you very much indeed. Bloomberg's Jennifer Epstein at the White House, and Tom Giles, of course, in San Francisco. Meanwhile, President Trump has also been pushing forward new policy towards China. Trump signed an executive memorandum that authorizes U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer to review and investigate China's potential intellectual property violations, in particular the practice of forcing U.S. companies operating in China to transfer technological know-how. Chinese state media on Monday criticized Trump's plans for an IP probe, saying the action will do more harm than good. Now coming up, Bitcoin continues to surge, this time past $4,000. What's driving this demand? We'll discuss next. This is Bloomberg. Now it's another successful rocket landing for SpaceX, the 14th to be exact, the 6th time the reusable portion of the Falcon 9 returned to Earth successfully post-launch. Monday's rocket carried a Dragon capsule loaded with over 6,400 pounds of cargo destined for the International Space Station. The Dragon will spend the next couple of days in orbit before meeting up with the station on Wednesday. Now, Bitcoin continues to show no signs of slowing down. The cryptocurrency soared past $4,000 for the first time ever, and that's a gain of nearly 20% since Friday. This rally comes after a split last week that threatened to jeopardize its growing mainstream interest. Joining us now is Coinbase Vice President Adam White. Coinbase is an online platform that allows users to buy or sell Bitcoin by connecting with their bank accounts and other digital currencies. In fact, so the digital currency exchange announced Thursday it's received a $100 million investment. Adam, congratulations on that. First of all, let's get back to this Bitcoin surge. I'm looking on my Bloomberg at the moment. I mean, this trades phenomenally over the weekend. Of course, this asset never sleeps. What is driving it higher at the moment? Is it down to the hope that we can see larger transaction sizes and this asset grow?
I think that's exactly right. What we're seeing is the market respond to a real improvement, a real leap forward in the technology that stands behind Bitcoin. So something called segregated witness locked in over the last few days. And segregated witness is effectively an improvement to the core protocol that could have Bitcoin processing the same number of daily transactions as we see from the likes of Visa and MasterCard.
What about geopolitics? Because there was talk, of course, a lot of deals being done in terms of Bitcoin versus the South Korean won, well, Ethereum and the South Korean won as well. Is there geopolitics at stake here driving it higher?
I do think Bitcoin and other digital currencies like Ether and Litecoin, for example, all are influenced by kind of the macroeconomic factors at work. So a good example is what we saw just last week is that Fidelity, one of the world's largest brokerages here into the U.S., is actually doing an integration so that all Coinbase customers can attach their accounts to Fidelity and see their digital currency holdings right in line with their traditional financial assets. It's those types of partnerships. It's international exchanges like what's going on in Korea, Japan, parts of Europe. These are all factors that influence traders and the corresponding price of Bitcoin.
Of course, you're general manager also of GDAX. This is particularly aimed at institutional investors, at the professional investors for Coinbase. And Fidelity is really one of the institutional investors that is ahead of the game when it comes to digital currencies. I mean, they're mining their own Bitcoin, let alone integrating it into some of their own users being able to access their Coinbase accounts. Why are some other institutional players reticent to get in? Why do they perhaps need more trust to build within exchanges such as yourselves?
Yeah, I do think Abby Johnson, the CEO of Fidelity, is going to be looked back at as kind of a visionary. She sees something in where this industry is headed that's very exciting. Now, I think others, while they may not be as quickly moving in the space, are absolutely investigating it. Helping run GDAX, which is our institutional grade exchange, I'm on the front lines of speaking with these hedge funds, family offices, proprietary trading firms, and they're all starting to say, look, help us understand what digital assets like Bitcoin and Ethereum can become. Help us understand the market. If I had to pick one thing that I think is going to be a watershed moment, it's when we start seeing kind of more clear and consistent regulation, not just in the U.S., but abroad. That really helps give the confidence to institutions to begin trading this digital asset. And that's at the forefront of every decision we make here at Coinbase and GDAX, is how do we become the most compliant institutional customer provider here in the space.
Of course, you deem yourself the most trusted digital asset exchange. There have been worries about a hack that occurred back in May, for example. It was but a small one, I understand, and also you've been gaining so many users, but there's also issues about liquidity. I mean, how do you settle these sorts of concerns to ensure that it can keep growing and taking on the institutional demand as and when it grows? Yeah,
just to be clear, it wasn't a hack, and what we saw was a byproduct of still a relatively thinly traded, some might say still illiquid asset that Bitcoin and digital currencies are. So we can see movements very quickly in the marketplace when customers place large buy or sell orders, and that's effectively what happened in May and June. What we've really done is kind of recommitted to providing the stability, the transparency, the market integrity that institutional traders require. And we do that partly through this new fundraising round, right? Having raised $100 million, we're now able to continue to reinvest into the team and the customer support operations to provide world-class service to our customers and what they expect.
Sorry, so the individual who lost some $8,000 via his Coinbase because of his Verizon phone as well, that wasn't a hack?
I see. Okay. Yeah, I think, yes, what we saw, we call that an account takeover. And that's where when individuals have methods by which they'll be targeted for either having their phone ported or their password compromised because they didn't choose a very strong password. At Coinbase, we have a significant team that's there just to provide kind of fraud prevention, we call it. And we help kind of proactively notify customers when we see signs of things happening. And we have a number of kind of proprietary steps internally that we do that whenever we look at something suspicious, we take the effect to lock down their account. And many times we'll help write the customer as well.
Interesting. And of course, you've got this $100 million. You've got plenty of priorities there. New York office for GDAX. You've got a customer support engineering, as you mentioned. What about expansion of the cryptocurrency base that you currently do accept? Because you've got Bitcoin, you've got Ether, you've got Litecoin as well. You're looking into Bitcoin Cash. Any more to be added to the portfolio?
Yeah, this is something that we get asked a lot about, and we've spent considerable time we want to be thoughtful and ultimately provide a curated selection of digital assets that our customers can trade. On GDAX, which is our institutional platform, there's probably going to be more than what we'll see go onto Coinbase, which is more of a retail brokerage. But before we add any more digital assets, we want to get our current product to a place that customers are getting the experience they expect, and we have a stable and performant exchange, after which we accomplish that. Then we're going to start looking at adding new digital assets.
I'm sure the investor community waits with anticipation. Adam White, great to have you on. Thank you, VP of Coinbase. Wonderful to have some of your time today. Now, coming up, we dive into the latest Uber headlines, what one of the company's first backers is saying about its lawsuit against ousted CEO Travis Kalanick. This is Bloomberg.
I'm Mark Crumpton in New York. You're watching Bloomberg Technology. Let's begin with a check of first word news. Charlottesville, Virginia Police Chief Al Thomas says a hotline's being set up to enable people to report assaults and other criminal activity that may have occurred at Saturday's violent rally. He also said alt-right attendees had failed to follow an agreed-upon plan on entering Emancipation Park. The attendees were gathering to protest plans to remove a Confederate statue.
We did have mutually combative individuals in the crowd. We tried to be patient. We tried to give the individuals in the crowd who wanted to leave, we wanted to make sure that they were able to leave safely. We facilitated that process. We had a number of individuals who chose to remain and cause violence, cause disturbances in our community.
Authorities say 20-year-old James Fields drove his car into a crowd of counter-protesters. At least 24 were wounded. One woman was killed. Arizona Senator John McCain says smear tactics by so-called alt-right groups on National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster deserve an emphatic response. McMaster's been criticized recently by far-right news outlets. In a written statement, McCain said McMaster had served honorably in uniform and sacrificed more for the country than any of his detractors. Defense Secretary Jim Mattis says the U.S. will know within moments of a launch if a North Korean missile is headed to Guam. Secretary Mattis says if it hits, things could escalate very quickly into war. Mattis says it's, quote, game on if North Korea fires at the United States. He confirmed Guam is considered part of the United States. I'm Mark Crumpton in New York. Our colleague Paul Allen in Sydney with reports in just a moment. Paul, good morning.
Good morning, Mark. Well, it's looking like a positive day across the Asia-Pacific today after that strong rally we saw in the US. Nikkei futures stronger, and keep an eye on Toshiba. Maybe some more difficulties over the sale of its chip unit. An issue over payment could mean that deal gets slowed down. Here in Australia, ASX futures higher by 0.4% as we wait on a third quarter trading update from one of the big four banks, ANZ, a little later today. Also a little later this morning, minutes from the Reserve Bank of Australia's August meeting. The cash rate, of course, was held as expected at 1.5%, but we saw the Aussie dollar surge after that meeting, after talk that the neutral cash rate might be more like 3.5%. Don't expect to see any repeat of that talk when those minutes come out today. Elsewhere, we're waiting on earnings from China Everbright, Japan industrial production for June, and Indonesia's trade balance expected to show a slight contraction. I'm Paul Allen in Sydney. More from Bloomberg Technology next.
This is Bloomberg Technology. I'm Caroline Hyde. Now, the controversial H-1B visa program has been widely criticised for costing American workers their jobs.
Right now, H-1B visas are awarded in a totally random lottery, and that's wrong. Instead, they should be given to the most skilled and highest paid applicants, and they should never, ever be used to replace Americans. No one can compete with American workers when they are given a fair and level playing field, which has not happened for decades.
However, according to a new study from researchers at the Center for Global Development and the University of Michigan, this visa program has actually provided economic benefits for both the US and India, where many of the visas are distributed. Now, the combined incomes for the two countries as a result of the visa program rose by more than $17.3 billion. That was back in 2010. According to the research report. Joining us now in Washington for an in-depth look into the H-1B visa program is author of that study, Gaurav Khanna. Gaurav, thank you very much indeed for joining us. And first of all, talk to us about where these economic benefits are sprouting from for both not only the United States, but also the countries where these foreign talented workers flow from.
Right. So most of this is because of kind of the nature of the job that these H-1B workers are doing. Most of them are coming as computer scientists from countries like India, coming to the tech sector, working in the US. And essentially what that ends up doing is expanding tech production. And because technology is not just something that you and I consume in terms of software, but technology is also something used by other sectors of the economy in their production process. So car manufacturers use technology, the banking sector uses technology. So innovation and expansion in technology production essentially benefits other sectors of the economy as well. And this expansion in productivity is what ends up raising incomes in the US. Now, India benefited a lot from the H-1B program. They're the major suppliers of computer scientists. So even as early as 2012, 87% of all computer science H-1B visas were awarded to India. So what this ended up doing was Indian workers and students started acquiring skills that were valued in the US in the hope of winning this H-1B visa and coming to the US. At the same time, H-1B visas expire and return migrants go back to India and bring with them knowledge, technical know-how, and connections, and help develop the Indian tech sector, which then grew rapidly. And then there was an increase in tech production and economic growth in India as well in the same way. So the H-1B visa ended up benefiting both the US and India at the end of the day.
So this research, the numbers you cite are dating back to 2010. Can we extrapolate that this was the case? There was economic benefit on both sides of the equation from then until 2017. And will this be damaged by the US announcing new measures to make the program's use curtailed and perhaps eliminate the so-called widespread abuse of it?
Well, the results that on average the two countries are better off is rather robust. So I do expect that on average both countries to be better off under the H-1B program even down the line. But there are always distributional consequences. So some workers might be hurt by this program, and like you cited, certain abuses. So essentially what you find in our research is that wage growth for US-born computer scientists was slightly lower because of the H-1B program. But US-born computer scientists are a small part of the labor force. When you look at the overall benefits, they really far outweigh the costs because of the H-1B program. But since 2010, there have been other major developments. Other countries have started becoming major players, China and Canada. And so it's important to take into account the fact that there are other countries also competing for this global talent. So if the US really tries to restrict this flow of global talent from countries like India, you might actually see some of this migration flowing to other countries like Canada. And that might end up hurting the competitiveness of the US tech sector down the line.
Interesting. And of course, this is a global theme to a certain extent, in that I'm sat here in the United Kingdom as we debate the exit of the UK from the European Union and issues about the free flow of migrant labour here as well. Is it generally assumed that the more you blockade, the less freedom of movement, the more you are going to damage economics?
Well, it's hard to say. I think often you need to look at this at a case-by-case basis. In our research, we're focusing on H-1B migration. In a different context, you might find somewhat different results. But it's important always to keep at the back of your mind that there are certain costs and benefits. So even though some certain workers might be adversely affected, you might have to then think about whether the benefits really outweigh the costs, and then are there ways to try and compensate workers that may have been adversely affected because of the free flow of either migrant labor or even trade, for instance, or even trade in goods and services, right? It's important for policymakers to keep in mind that when there are these distributional impacts, that there should be ways to kind of relocate some of the benefits to compensate workers who may have been adversely affected.
And within your piece, the IT boom and other unintended consequences of chasing the American dream, what then of these changes to the H-1B visa, and whether indeed we will see, India continue to benefit or not, therefore? What do you expect that overall we will see continuation of that game? Do you think that this needed to be changed in some way? Because there have been many speaking out on both sides of the argument saying, look, it wasn't exactly fit for purpose in the way it was being used.
Well, I'm somewhat less concerned about what people thought the original purpose of the program was. I think it's important to evaluate the program on its current benefits and costs. And right now we find that that the benefits really do outweigh the costs. But then down the line, essentially what's happened because of the H-1B program is that India has become a major producer of tech, of IT. In fact, India has overtaken the US in technology exports. So because a lot of this work is now being outsourced to India, that's going to affect the technology production in the US. Now, the good thing, though, about outsourcing it to a country like India is that when the US imports this technology back from India, it's actually cheaper. So that means you and I can purchase software and apps at lower prices, more efficient software and apps at lower prices, and other sectors of the US economy as well can purchase better software at lower prices. And that's essentially what allows there to be productivity growth in manufacturing, in all kinds of manufacturing that uses this kind of software, and that, at the end of the day, leads to income growth across the board.
Productivity growth, something that the US is desperately looking out for at the moment. Gaurav Khanna, postdoctoral fellow at the University of Michigan, and indeed author of the IT Boom. That was a great report. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Now, Jana Partners continues to bet on groceries. The activist fund, founded by billionaire Barry Rosenstein, has announced a 2% stake in meal kit delivery service Blue Apron, which stock price is at nearly half its price since its IPO in June. Now, Jana also says it owns nearly 600,000 shares in organic grocer Sprouts Farmers Market. Remember, Jana reaped a $300 million windfall after selling its stake in Whole Foods back in July. Coming up, the maker of Angry Birds is gearing up for an IPO. We'll explore Rovio's plans to go public and any bumps in the game maker may face. This is Bloomberg. in today's revolving door, Pandora Media will have a new CEO. The company announced that it's hired Sling TV head Roger Lynch. He will be the fourth leader in less than 2 years charged with reviving the struggling online music company. Now, the appointment is effective September the 18th. Pandora also said that Michael Linton, the former CEO of Sony Entertainment, will join its board. Now, Angry Birds is one of the most recognisable games on the planet. Now, the maker of the game, Rovio, is planning an IPO as early as next month, People Are Familiar said. The Finland-based game maker could raise about $400 million with a valuation of $2 billion. I caught up with Bloomberg News Deals reporter Manuel Baigori and asked him, well, how is Rovio planning an exit?
It's a company that we have encountered. We've seen so many times they've tried to sell the business. A few times over the last few years, they weren't successful on that. I mean, there has always been issues about valuation. How much is the business worth? I mean, we've seen a wave of consolidation in the online gaming industry, video games, and they have been very successful with Angry Birds, right? The problem is for investors is like, okay, what is next? What else do they have to offer? And I guess that's the main challenge that the business owners are going to face.
And there are signs of diversification. Angry Birds has been a one-hit wonder so far, but they've got some other newer versions of the game coming out that are doing very well, and notably they're also doing pretty well in films.
Exactly, and precisely some of the funds for this potential IPO would be used to finance the next film, the follow-up of the first version, which was pretty successful last year. So, I mean, what's interesting here is that really caught our eye was we've seen a lot of companies in this space, and some of them in Scandinavia, as Rovio is being bought by Chinese investors, Chinese conglomerates, which sometimes have nothing to do with video games, by the way. But now with all the issues going on in China, financing and acquisitions, and people wonder what's going to happen with this company in particular. I mean, are they going to be able to find a buyer at the last minute before the IPO? Have they tried in the past and they weren't successful? Is the IPO the only route for them as an exit? But if so, I mean, how are going to believe in the valuation of the company? That is the main question.
The valuation is pretty high. They're looking for 10 times 2016 revenue, even though we saw revenue pick up quite a lot in 2016 as well.
Exactly, that's correct. But I mean, it's still very chunky, and I think investors are a little bit worried of this type of IPOs. Some of them haven't been very successful in the past, and the problem for them is they have tried to sell the business and they are seen as a seller, so that's going to create a little bit of pressure. That said, the franchise is there. They have an amazing brand. It's a really well-known tech company, and I'm sure investors, especially in a very shaky IPO market this year, they may still have appetite.
And it's a local listing. We're not going to see them go to America?
Yes, I guess that's one of the main question marks for people where they're going to list. I mean, our understanding is it will be in Europe, most likely in Scandinavia, but that remains to be seen. As you said, like in the US, it will make a lot of sense as well.
And going back to the history of Rovio, we saw about 4 or 5 years ago, Zynga, a rival, approached them and offering more than this particular valuation of $2 billion, offering $2.3 billion, and they said, no, we don't want it. This time they're coming out potentially with an IPO. But as you mentioned, Chinese buyers could be looking at them, and who in particular? We understand Tencent could be eyeing them up.
Yeah, Tencent, has been eyeing, video game companies for a long while. They have been very successful. They have been very aggressive in terms of pricing.
Who did they already buy? They bought one particular company who makes Clash of Clans.
Yeah, that was right. That was last year. It was like a $6 billion acquisition.
Supercell.
I remember Supercell. I remember we actually here at Bloomberg we followed that one pretty closely, and but I mean they could be a potential buyer even at the last minute. But again, it comes back to the issues facing Chinese companies now. I mean we have seen not that many of those acquisitions in the last few months, right? Actually, some of them are falling apart. So that will be a key factor to keep kind of like tension between public investors and private investors coming along at the last minute. One interesting idea also about Rovio is that you take a look at two crown jewels of Finland, like Nokia a few years ago and Rovio as well. I remember like 10 years ago, like both companies were seen as, wow, like paradigm of the Finnish tech industry, and both of them have struggled big time. I mean, Nokia has been able to actually kind of like, reorient a little bit, and now they seem to be doing better. This company, as you pointed out, as with many other tech companies, they refused to sell themselves at a very good valuation a few years ago, and now they find themselves with a much lower valuation with lots of challenges. I mean, we are seeing it across the board. It will be an interesting story to follow for sure in the next few weeks.
That was some of my conversation with Bloomberg News deals reporter Manuel Bagori. Now, coming up, we take a look at the top tech earnings on the block this week, why Alibaba and Tencent investors may have even more to cheer about. That's next. This is Bloomberg. Now, Alibaba is on a stellar run. The e-commerce company predicts its revenue will increase almost 50% this fiscal year on China's booming ranks of middle-class consumers. Its shares listed on the New York Stock Exchange have risen over 76% since the beginning of the year. And investors may have even more to cheer about when the e-commerce company reports its latest earnings on Thursday. Joining us to discuss Alibaba and other Asia tech earnings that are catching our eye from New York, it's Bloomberg technology reporter Selena Wang. So, Alibaba, what are going to be our key takeaways?
Well, as you said earlier, we're expecting very strong profit and sales growth. Alibaba has a lot of macro trends in China to face. More and more Chinese consumers are buying online, and Bloomberg Intelligence estimates that Alibaba makes up 95% of the e-commerce transactions in China. So as long as that market is growing, Alibaba is going to continue to grow as well. We'll probably expect to see more growth in some of their newer lines of business. Cloud computing has seen triple-digit growth for the last few quarters. Digital media and entertainment, investors will be looking to see if losses narrowed in that area as well. One part that might have investors slightly wary is the EBITDA margins. There's likely to be some pressure on that as Alibaba spends very aggressively to expand into its newer lines of business and target rural Chinese customers, which is where it's expected to have the most growth.
I mean, it's fascinating, these companies. Alibaba now trading at 64 times earnings. I'm looking at Tencent as well. Similar gains in terms of stock price, similar very heady price to earnings ratio. What are we expecting from the other giant, Tencent?
Well, Tencent's also expecting another stellar quarter with double-digit profit growth. Sales growth is supposed to be very secure as well. Tencent has not missed earnings in over a decade, and there's no reason to expect that this year is going to be any different. They have some huge growth coming from its newer game, Honor of Kings. It's estimated to generate as much as $3 billion of revenue just this year. It's so popular that the Chinese government said that it was causing negative impacts throughout the youth, so they actually had to put controls on how much time people could spend on that game. Another area is that ad sales are supposed to continue to grow market share. Tencent's WeChat has almost 1 billion users. It's very much the dominant social networking player there, so there's no reason why they won't continue to grow their ad sales and newer investments like video as well.
I mean, just amazing when you're going into the Bloomberg and looking at analyst recommendations for these stocks. I mean, Tencent doesn't have a single sell on it. Can we expect these heady directions in where the share price has been going, continuing to go that way, Selena? I mean, are there any risks?
I mean, both of these companies have very high expectations that they need to reach. Alibaba and Tencent have both made pretty risky and large bets. They've both spent a total of $55 billion in deals just for 2016 and so far of 2017. Now, Alibaba's mainly been investing in offline retail and Tencent in areas like entertainment and content. Now, I just want to read to you a few interesting stats that are very telling. Projections for share gains are rising much faster than actual earnings. So after rising more than 70% in 2017, Alibaba shares are trading at a multiple of 64 times earning, while Tencent is trading at 56 times profit. Now that's almost twice Alphabet's 30 and Facebook's 38. Now those are pretty dramatic differences. So some analysts are saying that this means it's inevitable that after a certain amount of time there will be a market pullback and that these valuations are much too high.
Maybe we've been saying the same about Amazon, which is what, above 100 times price to earnings. We'll see how these numbers go. Bloomberg technology reporter Selena Wang, you're going to be across all of them this week. Thank you so much. Now that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. On Tuesday's show, we'll have coverage from none other than the NBA Players Technology Summit in San Francisco and hear from the men who created the event, Andre Iguodala and Steph Curry from the Golden State Warriors. You do not want to miss it. Now, a reminder that we are live streaming on Twitter. Check us out. It's at Bloomberg Tech TV weekdays, 5 p.m. in New York, 2 p.m. San Francisco, 10 p.m. London. This is Bloomberg.